I still remember how I felt when I saw her message telling me she needed to stop doing our weekly check ins. Honestly, it was pure relief. I thought, this is great. I have been wanting to stop these check ins for a while now, but I never did anything about it. And in that moment, I realized she did the thing I've been wanting to do, but didn't. I just kept going because I kind of felt like I should. And now on this podcast, I talk a lot about finding momentum for things that matter, like establishing consistent practices to help you to reach a goal. The focus is on taking action and following through. But it's also important to know when it's time to stop and then actually stop. This might look small, like a decision to just stop it with time blocking because it's never really quite worked for you. Or it could be slightly bigger, like ending a recurring practice, like stopping attending a class twice a week at 5 p.m. because even though you like the class, it just creates a lot of stress for you to get there on time. It could also be making a major decision in your life, like to stop pursuing a career you've already invested years into. Now, today I'm focusing mainly on these recurring practices or commitments that you've made and looking at signs that it might be time to consider stopping. And what are some options that you can stop with confidence? I will also be sharing an update about this podcast. Now, first, let's acknowledge that for many people, stopping something that we've committed to can be difficult. What if stopping turns out to be a big mistake? What if this impacts how people see me or how I even see myself? Like, am I someone who doesn't follow through on their commitments? Am I a quitter? Am I being selfish for just deciding to stop because that's what I need and it's not for others? The other thing is, what if this damages relationships? If I'm not the only person involved here, maybe I'll feel really guilty for stopping. Now, I want you to remember that word, guilty, because we're going to come back to that word in a little while. Now, it's also difficult to stop when we are getting some value out of what we're doing. And so, all of these taken together, I know that this is not as easy as just saying, decide to stop and stop. So, first, what are some signs to look for? Well, here are the ones that I use in my life. And the first question is always, am I feeling any resentment? So, leading up to the thing I have to do, I might feel some dread. During the thing, I might feel restless. I might feel irritated. And then afterwards, I'm usually relieved that, this is over. It's just overall a really negative energy that is going on. And that also goes to my next sign, which is just looking at, does this drain me? Does it deplete me? How do I actually feel afterwards? Do I feel like it's just another thing I just have to get through to the end of it? And then afterwards, just kind of wish I didn't have to deal with that. And the other sign is, how do you feel when you imagine letting go? And I think there are two ways to do this. The first way is to imagine that you decide to stop, but the second way that sometimes is more helpful is imagining that the decision is made for you. You actually have no say in this. It just ends. Let's say tomorrow you just found out this is no longer a thing. How would that make you feel? And I recommend those two different ways because sometimes if you imagine saying no, it can actually stress you out a little bit. But when it's decided on your behalf, it can sort of separate you from this idea of guilt. And remember, we're going to come back to that word soon. So now how do you feel with that imaginary scenario? A really good sign that it might be time to stop is when you feel lighter, calmer, or like you can just exhale. You can finally take a breath. Before we move on, I do actually want to note that there are things in our lives that might feel difficult, they might feel challenging, but we don't actually want to stop doing them because they do have benefit. A perfect example of this is exercising. Exercising is inherently something that challenges us and it makes us stronger, it makes us better. But you might feel a little bit of a sense of dread leading up to it. You might want to put it off, but at the end of it, you feel like, okay, I've done something good, and there is that feeling of satisfaction. Now, if we keep going on this exercise example, there are times where you need to discern, is this simply just challenging, or should you actually stop or change course? So, just simply having to drag yourself to the gym, but at the end you feel good about it, well, then that's something you keep doing. But if you dread it to the point where you're feeling a lot of resentment, it's affecting your mood, irritability, then it's worth questioning whether there might be another option where you get the same or a similar benefit. For example, did you pay for an all access pass to a studio that you realize this is a terrible fit and I feel trapped in this? So every time you go, you are feeling all of this pent up resentment, you're feeling trapped, and you kind of that whole negative energy. Or maybe you signed up to work with a trainer who's just a really bad fit. And so you hate going, you hate spending that time together, but you feel like you're locked in and you don't want to stop. Or are you choosing a type of workout that's just leaving you so depleted that it's having negative impacts on other parts of your life? So you do want to look carefully at the overall impact so you can figure out if it's simply challenging or if it's genuinely a bad fit. Okay, so now that we've talked about signs that it is time to consider stopping, what's next? Well, first, if the option to stop is obvious and easy to do, well, then stop. Give yourself permission to say, I am stopping this. But if it's not obvious, so you're not 100% sure if it's the right choice, or it's not easy to stop, well, then I want you to consider a few options. So the first option you might choose is just, is there a way to pause for a set time period? This is a really good option to evaluate, is something worth keeping? The intention with this option is actually to return to it, but the goal of the pause is to find out, what does life look like? How do I feel if I am away from this for a while? This might be a little more difficult if it's external, meaning someone else has coordinated or you've committed to something. But you can ask yourself, what would I do if I genuinely had to step away for a while, whether that's maybe a planned trip or vacation, a conference, or if you had something unforeseen pop up and you had to step away? What would that look like? How would you communicate it? And that can sort of inform what this option could look like. The second option is, can you stop for now? This is more of an indefinite pause, but it's reversible. So, unlike the first option, your intention here is to stop. You're pretty sure stopping is the right choice, but you kind of leave the door open to return to it. This can be good for you, and it can also feel a little more comfortable when you are communicating that the door is open potentially. Another option you may want to consider, and this is very rare, by the way, it's an uncommon choice and it's also not an option for everyone, but this would be to stop everything for a while. I would call this kind of the nuclear option, where in some cases, though, it is useful. And I say it's useful because it is a clean slate. You only add back what is good for you. And there are times in your life where this might actually be forced upon us, like a medical reason that you have to stop everything, or unforeseen circumstances that pop up where suddenly everything has to pause. And what this does is it actually makes it easier for you to say no to things and for you to stop things because you are stopping everything during that time period. Now, I said this is rare. This is not necessarily an option for everyone, but there have been a couple of occasions in my life where that has happened, where I have had to say no to everything. And it really gives me an opportunity to look hard at what I am saying yes to and what I'm not, and to only add back the things that I really should keep. And sometimes I returned to something after that break, and it was very clear as soon as I returned of, oh no, I thought this was okay, but it's really not okay. Now, once you have an idea of which option, then it is up to you to follow through on this choice. If it's your own internal practice, that's a lot easier because you can stop doing what you've been doing and you aren't required to communicate it to anyone. You don't really have to tell anyone. Maybe it'll make sense if there are people in your household or someone else who might wonder what's going on, you can communicate it, but you don't really have to. But if, however, stopping requires that you communicate the change, this is where a lot of people hesitate, and they might stick with something longer even though they know they should stop. Like the experience I shared at the top of this episode, I knew I wanted to stop this weekly check in, but I kept going until someone else made the decision for me. You see, in the early years of starting my business, there was a small group of entrepreneurs that we got together and we decided that we were going to do these weekly check ins to help stay accountable. It lasted a few years, and over time, a few folks would sort of come and go, and there were always at least three of us. And eventually, there were signs that I wanted this to stop. But the idea of stopping, it just genuinely made me feel uncomfortable. When I imagined telling others that I wanted to stop the check ins, I felt guilty. Or that's what I thought it was. Turns out I was wrong. Early last year, I came across advice from Dr. Becky Kennedy. So she works a lot with parents. And she said that so many people use the word guilt wrong. So, what guilt actually is, it's when you have a negative feeling that you get because you act out of alignment with your values. You did something wrong that you actually feel was the wrong thing to do, and you feel bad and guilty about it. That is what guilt is. What guilt is not is the negative feeling we get when someone else is disappointed or upset with our choices, even when those actions are in alignment with our values. And this was a huge distinction for me of understanding the difference. Wanting to stop something that is no longer serving you, that's acting in alignment. You're not doing anything wrong. And if your choice to stop causes another person to feel disappointment, that might feel bad, but it's not guilt. Your choice to stop isn't wrong. No, maybe the way you communicated that you were stopping, that might have actually felt a little wrong. Like if you were to ghost a person completely so that you didn't have to have an awkward conversation, maybe you'll feel some guilt about that because that's not how you wish you had handled it. That is a true example of guilt. And it's not necessarily easy to communicate that you're stopping if someone else is involved. As I experienced myself, of just feeling this dread of not wanting to say that I wanted to end this thing. Turns out someone else had the exact same feeling and they were just the first one to say it. So if you take that definition of guilt and you look at what's happening when you don't stop, even when it's the right call, that's acting out of alignment. When I knew I wanted to stop the check-ins, but I stuck with it so that I didn't disappoint other people, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing when in fact I was simply avoiding the discomfort that could happen if I actually said the truth. So, ironically, avoiding the discomfort of saying I want to leave just left me with the discomfort of being stuck and resentful of this practice that used to serve me but doesn't anymore. I may have convinced myself that it was the noble thing to do, the selfless thing to do to keep going because it's for the best of the group. But really, I was just afraid of the consequences if I left and said it. Also, if I were in a group where one person feels trapped, obligated, or resentful, I wouldn't want to stick with it or have them stick with it for the group. That's actually a really negative experience, and it's probably going to eventually seep through. All this to say, it is not always easy to stop something when other people are involved. Your decision might disappoint someone, but there is some freedom on the other side of that temporary discomfort. And it is temporary. You and everyone else will move on. Plus, everyone else is so worried about their own stuff most of the time, they don't really think about you. It is important to remember that sometimes a pause is enough to want us to, or to give us that chance to see, do we want to keep something in our life? And sometimes we do, and we just needed a little bit of break or step away. Breaks are actually really natural and they can be really, really healthy. Now, that brings me to my podcast update. No, I'm not stopping the podcast. But I do have some genuine timing conflicts over the next couple of months that make it really difficult for me to maintain my live recording schedule. And honestly, recording live is what works really well for me. So I've made the deliberate choice to pause the podcast for around 2 months. With some refraining from some folks at last week's live stream when I was recording, I'm choosing to treat it like a podcast that has seasons, where there is a natural break between seasons. And this is the end of season 1, and I will be back again for season 2. And until then, remember that finding lasting momentum in one area of your life may mean stopping something else in another area. Whether it's draining your energy, taking up valuable time, or just simply no longer serving you, making the decision intentionally to stop something can free you up to do more of what really matters.